Welcome to Why I Left, a podcast that explores the Great Resignation. I'm your host, Brian Aquart. Join me as I chronicle real stories from real people about the reasons they decided to leave their jobs during the pandemic and what has happened since. Hello, and thanks for tuning in to this episode of Why I Left. In today's episode, I chat with Sara Madera. Sara is the founder of Plan Creatively, a company helping working moms find the passion for their careers while gracefully managing family and work so they can take care of themselves. After not finding the growth she was looking for, she decided it was time for a change. Now she's helping moms find joy and success at work and home. Let's go check out her story. All right, welcome back. So our guest today is Sara Madera. Sara is a career coach for working moms who helps individuals and organizations to be proactive in engaging mothers through this life transition while building resilience and cultivating high performance. Now, after being a leader in the corporate space where she created marketing and communication strategy and messaging across the globe, she decided to tap into her passion to develop people. Now, I learned of her after she was featured in Rebecca Knight's Business Insider article about McKinsey and Lean In's 2022 Women in the Workplace report, which I'll be sure to link to, as well as the article in the show notes. So hi, Sara. How you doing? Thanks for joining today.
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing very well. You know, this Women in the Workplace report, we're definitely going to get into that. It was a great report, and I'm glad that you definitely took some time today. And so prior to us talking a little bit about how you pivoted during the pandemic, how about you tell us a little bit about your upbringing and where you currently call home?
Yeah, I could probably spend all day telling you about all the places that I've lived, but I grew up in Orlando, Florida, and I was about 25 when I moved to Shanghai, China. And I haven't stopped moving since. I've lived in more than 8 cities. I lived in Orlando and Shanghai, Hong Kong, Los Angeles, New York City, Washington, D.C., Singapore, Playa del Carmen in Mexico, and now I'm living in the New York City area in New Jersey. We just moved back to the U.S. in August, and we're slowly getting readjusted.
Wow. That's probably a whole podcast episode in and of itself about the places that you've lived. And so I'm sure there's plenty of stories there, right? And so tell us a little bit about some of the things that you've been passionate about professionally.
So my undergraduate degree is actually in theater, although I was a stage manager, not an actor. So because I've always loved organizing people and ideas to make things happen. The messier, the better. And somehow theater worked with that. And so because of that, I've done a lot of different things. I started in events, doing events at Disney, and then at nonprofits, weddings, community events, all kinds of things, raising money, memberships. I worked in arts education and then in marketing and communications. But in all of my favorite roles, I was attracted to them because there was a problem that needed to be solved or something messy that needed a system, also connected with developing a team and helping each of those team members achieve their goals.
Oh, very nice. And now prior to launching your own company, tell us a little bit about, your work journey and kind of what's worked well in those environments that you've been a part of. I guess some of the messes that you've had to clean up.
Yeah, to be honest, I've always been a change agent. I love a challenge, fixing them and moving on. When I've had a supportive boss who gave me the freedom and offered me more challenge, I was the most engaged. Or when I had an awesome team that I knew had more to offer. I love developing them both individually, how they work together, and then how they worked with the rest of the organization. My husband's first question when I've applied for jobs, and since we've moved a lot, there's been a lot of applications, is if the job has people reporting to it. He knows that leading and developing people is what lights me up.
Very nice. And now, so I'm going to take you back to March of 2020, right? And so right at the time we're recording this, look, the pandemic is still going on. It's RSV right now, a little bit of flu right now, but I want to take you back to March of 2020, where we're really introduced to COVID. So talk a little bit about how the pandemic affected you.
I don't think this will be a surprise, but at first I thought it was an organizational challenge. How could I manage my kids' schooling, my job, and keep us entertained for hours at home? I created a daily schedule. I gave everyone a lesson to teach each day. I might teach English or reading. My husband might take math or a language. My mother-in-law, it was a blessing. She was stuck with us for 4 months and couldn't get home, took on Zoom calls and science. And then on the weekends, I planned elaborate themed days for us with snacks and activities and crafts. It was so fun. And it really brought us closer together. My kids and my friends still talk about these weekends. They were pretty over the top. But after 12 weeks or so of this, it was exhausting, right? I mean, of course, at first anything can be fun, but then it gets wearing. We were all looking for something different, how to define ourselves and our lives without the things that normally surrounded us, our friends, our colleagues, sports, whatever. Emotions and decisions started shifting more quickly after about a year of this.
No, I can only imagine. And, I have two small kids at the time, roughly 6 and 3. And it was rough. Remote learning was rough. I mean, I think that period in the beginning where it was like, yeah, we're all together. We had some fun initially. We definitely didn't last the 12 weeks that you lasted, but it was a tough go. But kudos to you and everybody for doing that. What were some of the things that you started to learn during this time?
Well, it was interesting for us because we were in Singapore. And so at first it was a bit scary. We knew it was inevitable that COVID would spread from China to us. And I was working for a major logistics company, and my role was to communicate with employees across the region. So I was pretty up to date with the numbers, the issues, the limited resources for, the PEP. But personally, honestly, I was really grateful to be in Singapore because most things are so tightly controlled there. I didn't have to become a COVID expert overnight. I didn't have to become a nurse or an epidemiologist. I didn't have to decide if I should wear a mask, go outside, work from home, or if my kids should go to school. The government decided all of that. And at first, it made me feel safe and cared for. But because I was working for a logistics company, it was a big change for this old historical company to start working from home. And I knew this would be a big change for our employees. So I developed communication that would be fun and informative, but also connect and remind employees that they were a part of something bigger, because I knew that this would be just such a big change and transition for them. It made such a big impact that this communication is still running. 3 years later, it was that effective. Yeah.
No, that's awesome. So you mentioned, being in Singapore, and look what I know of that area of the world, right? Singapore is one of the cleanest places ever, right? And, they're very, very strict on cleanliness, right? Mm-hmm. And so, being there when the pandemic started, what was it like? And how did you have to change the way that you worked?
Being in Singapore, it was, both a blessing and then later maybe a curse. But at first, for sure, it was a blessing because the government just told everyone they had to work from home. Everyone had to work from home. Kids had to be at home. There was, companies had to have a special accommodations in order to have people to go into the office. So that was a, really big change. It wasn't a choice. It wasn't even the company's choice. It was literally up to the government to decide these things. We couldn't go outside without a mask. Only so many people could gather at a time. Obviously restaurants were closed. And it was basically this way. We were in full and complete lockdown for 12 weeks. Nobody could leave their home. Only one person could go to the grocery store. You couldn't go outside. They were really quite strict. So for sure, companies kind of had to go into overdrive to figure out how to best manage this. And that was sort of where I felt the opportunity, was lying to really ensuring that all of these employees that suddenly were working from home after, this old company had never allowed that before, to make sure that they still felt like they were part of something, that they were, accommodating. And of course, in logistics, it was a crazy time. It was like the logistics companies suddenly became the most in-demand companies, in the world. So everyone was incredibly busy and working from home. It was just so much change happening all at the same time, for everyone across the world. I think in Singapore, we maybe just got a little bit of a head start. It started in March for us at the very, very beginning. And so, in many ways, I feel like, Singapore started the systems. They created a lot of the systems that I feel like other countries later used.
Oh, definitely. And, how did the pandemic really start to affect your relationship with your job and really how you were treated on the job? That's a huge shift that you were just explaining.
Yeah, I think the hardest part about it was that I started a new job basically as people were starting to go work from home, right? I started in February of 2020. So I didn't really get the chance to, build as many relationships or connections or alliances as I could have in person. And so that really impacted, about 7 months later, my department was reorganized. And I went from having the most amazing, knowledgeable boss in the US to a new boss in Europe with no understanding of the work that I was doing, with little concern for my time zone or time of day. And I felt really alone, and I didn't have anyone to turn to for advice or support within that.
I saw something in the article you mentioned about, your boss didn't have your back, right? And so I saw that come up. So how did that show up in the workplace, and really how did you respond when it happened?
Yeah, because of that reorganization, a lot of our processes were in flux and it upset our partners who didn't understand why or how these changes were occurring. And honestly, we didn't either. We weren't communicated with either. And so my boss, rather than saying, yes, this is a problem, we're working through it, please be patient, instead of, offering that sort of support, would instead throw us under the bus for the changes. Mostly because he didn't understand the changes himself. He didn't understand the process, he didn't understand what we were doing, and he didn't educate himself on those processes either. So, instead of learning, his response was to throw us under the bus. And so it just felt like I needed to have an armor and shield on at all times, rather than creating those new opportunities or solving problems, which is the part that I love.
Oh, definitely. So looking back, what's one thing that you would have done differently during the pandemic?
Yeah. So interestingly, that boss left the company at the beginning of this year for reasons shrouded in secrecy. So it may be that I was not the only one having these issues, but I'm not sure that, 6 more months or a year of that misery would have changed much. I love the work that I'm doing now. So I consider it all a learning experience.
Okay. No, very good. And so look, now after being with this last company, you were there for about a year and a half, but you've been in this industry for around 10 years. You decided to leave your role in July of 2021. So ultimately, why did you leave your job during the pandemic?
Obviously having a bad boss makes things hard, but also I think it made me realize that my passion was elsewhere, that I sort of took this as an experiment to get me closer to what I wanted to do, but it didn't get me there. And I knew what it was. I knew what I wanted to do. I really wanted to focus on people and developing them.
Oh, definitely. And, the idea of when it comes to actually saying, hey, I'm going to leave, right? And you're actually going through it. How did it impact you to finally make this decision?
There was a couple of factors, I think, that kind of came together all at the same time to really kind of give me the sense of relief that came in the end. That along with having a bad boss, the company I was working for at the time was struggling how to handle Pride Month in Asia because, in many of the countries in Asia, being gay is still illegal for some of the countries. And so my team had come up with a beautiful way to talk about, loving and accepting all, but it was shot down by the leaders specifically in Singapore. And it made me realize that my values, the values I want to raise my kids around, were not reflected in the community in that I was living in. And, at the same time, I was reading about the She Session and realizing that working moms have the weight of the world on their shoulders. And I had tools that could help. So it sort of felt like this sort of kismet opportunity of I want to go be back in the US where my values and, I can raise my kids around those values. At the same time, this is the right professional place for me to be to really support these working moms that just kind of came together in this perfect storm, but in a good way. So I knew that would involve an international move, which would be exhausting. But after that, I knew that it just felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. And that's not to say that being an entrepreneur is easy, not in any way, but it feels right in a way that role did not.
Yeah. And, I mentioned earlier how, I learned about you through this Business Insider article, right? But I'm curious, what's been the reaction to the story? And really, what are your thoughts about Lean In's 2022 Women in the Workplace report?
Yeah. Well, the response to the article has been great. I've received support from other working moms, particularly those in the United States where there's less structure in place for working families. And so I think that the stats from that report on flexibility are so true. So many of my clients are seeking a new role that offers them flexibility because the one that they have currently doesn't. And it's too hard to manage all of the responsibilities at home within the hours they spend in the working office or commuting. And it impacts their relationship with their child, with their partner, with themselves. And I mean, it's same for me as, moving back to the US and experiencing this firsthand. We have 2 kids in public school where I'm pretty sure to date, there's only been 2 or 3 full weeks of school with no early dismissals or late starts or school closures, whatever it is, right? And because childcare is often left to the mom, flexibility is necessary. It's, it has to be there.
No, definitely. And I wanted to read you a stat, right? Because I love some of the work we're doing, and we're going to get into kind of what you're up to now. But here's a stat I found that was very interesting. 49% of women leaders say flexibility is one of the top 3 things they consider when deciding whether to join or stay with the company, compared to 34% of men leaders. Now, you talk a lot about flexibility in your work with working moms. So it's a perfect segue into, tell us a little bit about some of the things that have happened since you left and really more about your company, Plan Creatively.
Yeah. Yeah, it was the pandemic that really helped me find my people and know that working moms were the population that I wanted to focus on. I'm one, I was living it, and it just was that moment. And all of the women I work with are so smart. They are so amazing. And often they know the answers of what they need to accomplish for what they want. And their sessions with me actually give them the time and the space to explore it, to define it, and to make a plan, essentially changing their lives. They are no longer the mom robot. One of my clients said it. I thought it was the best definition. Like, they are no longer a mom robot. They understand that they can actually, create time for themselves and take care of themselves. So I've created programs for women at all stages, but with the end goal of fulfilling their career goals while gracefully managing their work, home, and that time for themselves. So it makes them not have to be a mom robot.
Oh, I love that. And so was there like a pivotal moment in starting your business?
I think so. I think it was when we decided to move back to the US, that with realizing that the She Session and how much the pandemic really impacted those working moms. And then also with wanting to move back to the US kind of at that same time for more personal reasons, but where women were feeling, most of the She Session the most acutely. And so it just kind of felt perfect.
Yeah. And for those who may not be familiar, could you tell us a little bit about what a She Session is? Explain that to our listeners.
Oh. Yes. So everyone's, we've probably heard of the Great Resignation, or the Lean-In article talked about the Great Breakup. And with so many people leaving the workforce, it was, when they really looked at the data, it was mostly women who were leaving, and a higher impact of women with those with young families, because they were just at a breaking point with the pandemic of having to manage, work, home, school, being a nurse and being everything all at the same time, to their families. And there's an amazing researcher who came up with the term She Session to really show that this impact, that this Great Resignation is mostly impacting women, that more women lost jobs, more women left their jobs, more women left the workforce during this time than men. And so that this term She Session, I thought, just reflected it beautifully.
No, definitely. And then, what's interesting on that is so the flip side of that is now almost 50% of the new businesses started within the past year have been by women. And so it's interesting to kind of see the exodus from the workforce, but it's not, what I love about that is they still want to work, right? Just not for you. Okay. And so they started themselves. And so I think those stats are very, very interesting to see. And so now when you think about everything that you've been through these past couple of years, what have you really learned about yourself throughout this process?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I think becoming an entrepreneur has really made me so much more self-aware. And, the rules and the lessons, I don't know, that I've learned have been so much. But I think one, I've learned I cannot do everything myself, both as a business owner, both as a mom, as a person in the community. I cannot do everything myself. I need the support of my partner, of our family, of whoever it is that I can to sort of become a part of our community. That is really important. But also that building a business takes time. That there's no overnight sensations, at least not in my world. And it takes time. I have to be patient. That's hard.
No, definitely. I hear that. And, that's actually a great segue into, one aspect of the show that I love folks to hear, especially from the guests that we bring on, is really about advice, right? And so for people who might have a similar situation to yours, maybe they're either not getting the support from their leader or whatever the case may be, but they don't know what to do next. What are 3 steps that you think they should take right now?
Yeah, I think that is such a good question. And I kind of wish I had this advice when I was going through it at my last job. But I would say one is to talk to a trusted advisor, whoever that is for you, whether it's a friend, a colleague, a mentor, a coach, someone who can listen and actually give you unbiased feedback about what they hear you saying. This will give you a sense of the magnitude of these issues. And then, is it something I can live with? Is it not? You start to get a sense of that by talking to somebody else. And it gives you an idea of your next steps. I think number 2, you probably have to talk to your leader, if it's a situation similar to mine, you probably need to have a conversation with them. Of course, it depends on your relationship with them, of how it should be framed. But for most, positioning the conversation around better alignment for the achievement of the boss's goals should be a good start. Shows them that you're on the same page and that you want to work together. It gives them a reason to care. And, their response to that will give you a really good idea as well about your next steps. Are they open to that? Are they receptive? Are they not? You'll start to get a better sense of, where you want to go. And then 3, decide how important is this to you? Do you like the company, but not the job? What can you do? If you like the job, but not the company, what can you do? Knowing where you stand and your options can make your next steps clearer.
I love that. And now what more do you think employers could be doing to better support employees and, as a whole, or maybe even specifically women in the workplace?
This list could take a while, but I'll try to be brief. Beyond that paid leave, the flexibility, and the policies that support families, I think having resources that are specifically around the support that the employees need will provide that equity and allow for more female leaders. So this might look like coaching, to help working mothers figure out what that success looks like, or child care support. Or it may mean work from home. But until employers speak to their employees and encourage conversations that embrace that whole employee, they'll never know what they need.
Absolutely. We've brought on a few coaches here on the show. What could someone expect? Like if they're going to hire Sara to be their coach, what is the type of initial process that you take them through in order to figure out whether or not this is a good fit?
Beyond the conversation to really find out do we have chemistry? Do you relate to what it is that, my methods and what I talk about? I have sort of 2 or 3 sort of key pieces that I really work on in my coaching. And one of them is a time audit that I work on with my clients to really evaluate where they're spending their time and then where they want to be spending their time and how we get from one to the other. Because sometimes you don't realize how much time you're really spending on making the kids' lunches, for example, or, how much time you're spent commuting. And really where you want to be spending that time. So that's one big piece. And then another big piece that I really focus on is values. What is actually important to you? I was working with a client this morning and, we were looking at maybe a list of, I think it was 10 or 12 things. And all of them were listed 4 or 5 for her. Everything was of the utmost importance. And I was like, okay, well, this may be why, we're not making as much progress as, you may have wanted, because everything is so important, which there is beauty in that. There's beauty in exploring everything, but also, your progress may be slower. Are you okay with that? Or do you want to focus on one thing? Both are okay, right? But I think exploring those values and really understanding and articulating what it is that's important to you will really help you define those goals and really make sure that you are making the impact where you want to be making the impact. Do you really want to be making your impact in the kids' lunches? Is that where, or is it in your career? Which it is the lunches, that's great, right? People have made whole careers out of making these gorgeous bento boxes, right, for their kids and showing them on social media, which is great. If that's taking away from the time you want to be spending, on yourself or on your job, then let's look at that time, right? And let's look at those values and how those are connected.
No, I love that and really appreciate that because, I don't think people fully understand sometimes the benefit of coaching, right? And so I've been bringing some more coaches on the program to talk specifically about that. And it's kind of a twofer with you, right? You're not only great resignation, but you're also a coach. So I'm winning right now, right? So,
I like it.
Right? Exactly. And so now when you think about, this next chapter of your professional life, what type of impact are you hoping to have?
I really want moms to know that they don't have to do it all alone. I know in especially those early days of motherhood with newborns, it feels like it. You feel so alone, but you don't have to be. And with so many moms, especially those high achieving women, they don't want to compromise or let anything go. But the same way you'd hire a taxi to get you to the airport rather than walking, a coach can help you get to where you want to go faster and more comfortably than doing it alone. And so I want moms to know that the support is available. You don't have to go it alone. You don't have to figure out home, kids, work all on your own. But I also want them to know that together we can change the future of work. It's already happening. These reports are happening. These Lean In reports, these McKinsey reports, the Deloitte reports are happening. And the more that we are clear on what we want, we can make the change that we want.
No, absolutely. And you are so right about that. There's so much data out here. One, the future is hybrid. Without a doubt, right? And all of the industries forcing folks to come back in the office, that's a slippery slope that they're going to find themselves on. But I really appreciate you kind of sharing that because you're right. Things are changing for the better, I think, for the better of the workplace of the future. Well, look, Sara, this has been a great discussion. I want to really thank you for taking some time to speak with me today. Pleasure hearing your story. I had to stop myself from going into all the places that you've lived because I want to keep focused on what we're talking about, on what I'm supposed to be talking about here. But I'm just very fascinated that you really took some time and would love for us to stay connected. But would also love for you to share where our listeners can support you.
Yes, please come visit me on my website, www.plancreatively.com. I'm also on Instagram, plancreatively8. I'm on LinkedIn under my name, Sara Madera. I also have a page there, Plan Creatively. So come find me, come visit me. I'm happy to hear. I love to talk to women about their challenges, their inspirations, what's working for them, what's not, what help they need, where they're winning. I love to hear it all.
No, and I love it. I will say I love your content too. It's very uplifting when it comes across my feed. And so keep doing the great work that you're doing. So look, that'll do it for today's episode. Again, I want to thank Sara Madera for joining us today. I'll be sure to share her information in our show notes. So hope you all have a great week, and we'll see you next time. Sara, thank you again.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks again for listening to Why I Left. Be sure to join us next time for more stories from the Great Resignation. Visit us at www.whyileft.co. That's whyileft.co. And subscribe to the show on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.